Hello, students. In Chapter 8, we are going to be talking about consciousness, brain, and behavior. It's a very interesting chapter, so we get to talk about things that are more familiar and, a little bit of physiology and some psychology in there. So we're going to talk, in this short video, we'll talk about the electroencephalogram, which is an EEG. We'll talk about the waking state and consciousness and sleep. The other topics to talk about in this chapter would be conscious experience. So, what is consciousness versus loss of consciousness and so on. Then we'll talk about a little bit about the physiology of motivation and emotions. And then the altered states of consciousness. How does the learning process work? How does memory work? And then we'll talk about cerebral dominance and language. So let's first off talk about the state of consciousness, which refers to the level of alertness, like how awake are we, versus drowsy or just asleep. Okay, and our state of consciousness is really defined in two different ways, either by behavior, okay, where the behavior of that person goes from, it's a spectrum where it goes from full alertness to a patient in coma. Okay, or we can measure the electricity coming out of the brain. So we can measure the brain activity, and that is recorded through an EEG. That is an electroencephalogram. It works pretty much the same way as an EKG that records the electrical changes coming out of the heart. And we kind of put these probes on different parts of the scalp in order to pick up the electricity coming out of the brain. So what are we picking up? We are really picking up mostly graded potentials. Okay, so even as you are recording the EEG, the patient isn't really doing anything. They're laying still, but you're still picking up signals from the brain, and they're mostly not action potential. The majority of what you're picking up are actually graded potentials, and they're kind of summing up all of these graded potentials to give you these summed postsynaptic potentials. And the majority of the electrical signals that you see are coming from what are known as the pyramidal cells of the cortex, and these are motor cells. These are giving orders to the different parts of the body. So what are the clinical uses for an EEG? Why would somebody need one? Well, we need it to monitor the cerebral activity during surgical procedures if the patient is under general anesthesia. We also use it to diagnose neurological diseases and to diagnose coma and brain death. So we'll talk about the different waves that we can see in an EEG. Okay, this right here is pretty much the normal standard EEG pattern. And for example, here, this patient right here will have a seizure. You could see kind of like this electrical storm that tends to happen, and that is known as I said, the electrical storm, and that is diagnostic of an epileptic seizure. You could see where the waves start to change. Okay, that would identify the onset of a seizure. We'll take a look at epilepsy for a second, where it is a common neurological disorder. It happens to about 1% of the population. Epilepsy is also a range. Okay, so what is known as the grand mal epilepsy, where the patient loses consciousness and there are just involuntary muscle contractions or seizures, that is, one range of the spectrum. But there are other parts of this. A patient can experience an epileptic attack in the form of just numbness, okay, in one limb without any loss of consciousness. So again, it's a wide range of different signs and different symptoms. Okay, the reason for epilepsy, most of the cases, we don't really know what happened. It could be triggered due to trauma to the brain. It could be due to some abnormality that happened in prenatal development. Is it due to heavy alcohol or heavy drug abuse? Was it post-infectious? So somebody got a meningitis or encephalitis, and then this happened as a complication later on, even though the infection is not there any longer. Extreme stress and sleep deprivation, both of them could trigger epileptic attacks. exposure to environmental toxins like carbon monoxide, and lead, those can also trigger epileptic attacks. So again, there's really not one reason for epilepsy. Every patient has a different reason. In some patients, we actually don't even know what the cause is. Now, what is the waking state? So if you look at an EEG, those waves are what are known as alpha and beta waves. Alpha waves are when a patient is alert, but they're relaxed. Beta waves is when a patient is alert and thinking. So you're like when you're listening to this recording right now, when you're in a test, all of these are different waves due to the brain activity that's happening. Alpha rhythms, which are the ones again that when the person is relaxed, those are recorded over the parietal and occipital lobe and associated with decreased levels of attention. So you are awake, but you're not really focusing on something. They're more of when you're relaxed and happy. Okay, but when you start to think hard and you start to process different stimuli, external stimuli, that is when the waves change into these beta rhythms. So we'll take a look and see what they look like. So this right here are alpha rhythms. These are relaxed when your eyes closed. These are the beta rhythms. So you see here that the amplitude is much smaller, higher in frequency, and this is when a patient is alert. So those are known as beta rhythms. And these are what happen when you're awake. So let's talk about sleep, because we're going to change these waves into different waves when we fall asleep. Okay, so the EEG pattern changes as we go to sleep. As you become drowsy, your beta rhythm waves, or your beta waves, which are the ones that are when you're focusing and paying attention to things, are gradually going to change into a predominantly alpha waves. Now, when you start actually falling asleep, you are going to start getting these newer waves. These are kind of known as the theta and delta waves. Okay, so these are, one of them are larger amplitudes like these theta waves, and delta waves that are slower than the theta ones. When you actually fall asleep, well, there are two different phases of sleep. There is non-REM or non-rapid eye movement, and REM or the rapid eye movement sleep. So let's take a look at these stages. These yellow ones represent the patient or the person being recorded as they sleep. So if anybody got a sleep study done, or if you know somebody that went through a sleep study, it's basically where the patient comes in and they sleep through the night, and with things being recorded, one of them being an EEG. Okay, so these yellow strips, those are the waves that occur while they're still awake. So you can see these beta waves. And then as the patient shuts down their, as you close your eyes and you start to relax, the beta waves are going to be replaced by these alpha waves. Now these blue strips, all of those represent the non-REM sleep. So there are 3 stages to non-REM sleep. First one, that's N1, where these theta waves start to come in. Okay, theta waves basically mean that the patient is now starting to fall asleep. That sleep is very light. You can easily wake them up until they get into this N2, where we have sleep spindles and K complexes. On a test, you're not going to be asked, you won't get one of these strips and asked to identify what kind of the waves that are up there, but you do need to know what the interpretation of these waves are. So you could easily get a question saying, you are looking at an EEG and there are a bunch of K complexes. What does that mean? Okay, so these are the kind of questions you'll be getting. So for sleep spindles, that is actually the brain processing everything that happened during the day. And that's why we always say that one of the ways to study is to sleep. Okay, so you study throughout the day, and then when you go to sleep that night, your brain is processing all of the information that you took in throughout the day. That processing is recorded in an EEG in the form of a sleep spindle. Okay, so that doesn't mean that you sleep 2 or 3 days and say, well, you know what, my physiology professor told me that I need to sleep. Okay, that's not how you study. You study first, and then you process the info through sleeping, getting a good night's sleep to properly process what you've learned. Now, these K complexes, okay, these larger amplitude K complexes, this is the brain registering things happening while they're sleeping. So if there is a sudden noise, for example, the brain will pick that up. The patient didn't wake up, but it did register in the brain. So these K complexes are just interruptions that are happening, different senses, whether noises or flashes of light or so on, as they're sleeping. Now this N3, these are known as delta waves. These are very slow waves. And this is a more deeper sleep until they move on to our REM sleep, or the rapid eye movement. This non-REM lasts for about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and then we move on to REM. REM is also known as paradoxical sleep because the patient is asleep. They're actually dreaming during REM phases. But if you look at these waves that are being recorded, these are beta waves. So these are the exact same waves that we record up here when we're all alert and taking a test. Okay, so beta waves are what we show when we're during REM sleep, hence the name again, paradoxical, because there is lots and lots of brain activity happening, although the patient is asleep and dreaming. So dreaming occurs during this REM phase. During REM, it's called rapid eye movement for a reason, because the eyes are moving back and forth very fast during that phase. That moving very fast is not so that you can watch your dreams. It is actually part of the sleeping process. The heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, respiratory rates go up. So again, paradoxical sleep. Patient's asleep, but there is so much going on. So non-REM sleep, that is the initial phase of sleep. Okay, as we've mentioned, it's divided into these 3 different patterns, N1, 2, and 3. N1, where these theta waves begin to appear among the alpha waves. In stage 2, we have the sleep spindles, and that's again when your brain is processing all of the information that you've gathered throughout the day. And K complexes these are known as kind of interruptions, where the brain is recording different sensory stimuli in there. But again, the patient remains asleep. In stage 3, the N3, we have these delta waves. Okay, and that stage is known as a slow wave sleep because these delta waves are very slow. Now, this whole process takes about half an hour to 45 minutes, and we progress in that order. So we go from that alert phase to drowsy alpha waves, and then we go through N1, 2, and 3, and then off to the REM. REM takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we go back to N2, 3, and then REM again. So you see here that we really do not go back to N1. N1 was a very light sleep, so as the cycle of sleep goes throughout the night, we just keep on going from REM to N2, N3, and then REM again, and then N2, N3, and REM, and so on. Now for the REM sleep, that is also known as paradoxical sleep because again, patient is deeply asleep. It is harder to wake up someone in that stage of sleep. But the EEG is extremely active. We are getting these beta waves that are associated with alertness. Okay. If you wake up a patient or person during REM sleep, this is when they will tell you that, oh, okay, I was just dreaming right now. Okay. So they would report that they were dreaming. If uninterrupted, the stages of cycle occur in that order. So when they fall asleep, N1, 2, and then N3, and then REM. But again, as the cycle repeats itself, we don't start at N1 again because N1 is that very light stage of sleep. But we will keep on repeating a cycle, N2, 3, and then REM, and 2, 3, and then REM and so on until the patient wakes up or the person wakes up. Now, why is it that we need sleep? Sleep is actually found to be part of homeostasis. Okay, it's needed just like we need to eat and we need to drink. It is one of the ways that literally has been used for in torture, which was to prevent people from falling asleep. Okay, it'll mess up everything. It will mess up their immune system. It'll mess up their memories. It'll mess up with their moods and leading to depression. It'll mess up their cognitive abilities. And it can even lead to psychosis and death. So having a good sleep routine is extremely important in maintaining homeostasis. As you've seen through these spindles that we talked about, where you're processing and learning, everything that you learn through the day, you're processing and engraving those memories while you're sleeping. Okay, and that is why sleep is extremely important for both learning and memory formation. And your brain really experiences a lot of what or processes as you're asleep what happened prior to being awake. So before you go to sleep, that is not the time to watch a horror movie, okay? Because that is what you'll be processing throughout the night. Before you sleep, you want to relax. You want to maybe watch something that is funny. Go back and take a look at, your chapter outlines, maybe anything that you want to actually process while sleeping. Okay. And again, sleep deprivation. So it's not a good idea to go through the night studying and not get enough sleep before you have a test, because sleep deprivation will definitely affect your memory and your attention. Now I'm going to stop this portion and I will see you in part 2.